Laura pushed open the door to her small apartment, the chill of the city night still clinging to her. The familiar hum of neon lights from the diner across the street seeped through the half-closed blinds, casting a faint, flickering glow across the room. She kicked off her heels, tossing her purse onto the warm couch, and sank into its embrace with a sigh. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it lazily, half expecting it to be a message from a client or a promotional text. Instead, it was a missed call from an unlisted number. A single voicemail awaited her. Curiosity piqued, Laura tapped to listen. "You looked lovely in red tonight," a distorted voice murmured, the words barely audible beneath a layer of static. She frowned, glancing down at the black dress she had worn to work. She hadn't worn red all evening, or so she thought. It wasn't until she stood to fetch a glass of water that she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her robe, thrown on casually upon entering, was a deep crimson. Her stomach tightened, a coincidence, surely. Shaking off the unease, she dismissed the message and went to bed. The next morning, the city was already alive with noise as Laura made her way to the kitchen. Her phone buzzed again, another voicemail from the same enlisted number. "Watch out for the coffee." The voice crackled. Laura stared at her phone. Her routine rarely included coffee, since she preferred tea. Brushing it off as a strange prank, she got dressed and headed to a nearby cafe. But as she reached for her usual tea, her hand hesitated. A moment later, she ordered a coffee instead. It wasn't until 9 a.m., as she stepped into the elevator at her client's building, that the paper cup slipped from her grasp, splashing hot liquid onto her blouse. She froze, heart pounding, as the voice echoed in her mind. The prediction had come true. That night, alone in her apartment, Laura replayed the voicemail over and over, searching for some clue. Each time, the static seemed to grow louder, as if something, or someone, was hiding within it. The unease gnawed at her, growing with each passing day. When another voicemail arrived, this time predicting a near miss with a speeding car, Laura decided she needed help. She called Ben, an old friend with a penchant for tech and conspiracy theories. "Sounds like someone's tapping into your life," Ben said after hearing the story. "Let's check it out." He arrived with his laptop and a collection of gadgets, setting up shop in Laura's cramped living room. As they played back the voicemails, Ben's brow furrowed. "This isn't normal," he muttered. "The number doesn't exist. It's like the calls are coming from nowhere." He ran the recordings through various filters, trying to isolate the static. The results were chilling. Beneath the distortion, faint whispers could be heard, too garbled to understand, but undeniably present. "Laura," Ben said quietly, "this isn't just a prank." The voicemails continued, each one more detailed than the last. Laura began to see faint figures in the corners of her vision, shadowy shapes that disappeared when she turned to look. Her apartment felt different, the air heavier, the silence punctuated by faint crackles of static. One night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. She didn't need to check it to know what it was. The voicemail played automatically this time, the voice clearer than ever. "You're not alone, Laura." Her heart pounded as she bolted upright, scanning the room. In the dim light, she swore she saw a figure standing by the window. But when she turned on the lamp, the room was empty. Sleep was impossible after that. Haunted and desperate for answers, Laura turned her focus to the mysterious number. After hours of searching old records and forums, she stumbled upon a chilling discovery. The number once belonged to her childhood home. Memories she had long buried resurfaced, memories of her mother, a cold and distant figure who spent hours on the phone, her voice harsh and commanding. The last memory was the worst, the day her mother disappeared. Laura's hands trembled as she pieced it together. The calls weren't random, they were tied to her past. The next voicemail came late one night, the tone colder and more urgent. "Don't go home tonight, Laura. The message sent chills down her spine, but she was too exhausted to care. She hadn't slept in days, and the thought of spending another night away from her apartment was unbearable. Ignoring the warning, she returned home. As she stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different, oppressive, heavy. The air was charged, and the familiar hum of the city seemed distant. Her heart raced as she turned on the lights, only to find her living room in disarray. Her furniture had been overturned, and her belongings were scattered. On the mirror, written in a jagged, static-like script, were the words, "You should have listened." A chill ran down her spine. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Trembling, she pulled it out and played the voicemail. "You can't run from this, Laura." The lights flickered, and the static sound grew louder, filling the room. Shadows gathered in the corners, coalescing into a humanoid shape. The figure was featureless, its body a swirling mass of darkness and static. It stepped closer, the sound of white noise rising with each step. Laura backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. The figure raised a hand, and her phone slipped from her grip. The voicemail played on a loop, the distorted voice repeating its ominous message. In a burst of adrenaline, Laura screamed, "What do you want from me?" The figure stopped, the static wavered, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then, in a voice that sounded like her mother's, the entity replied. The truth. Determined to end the nightmare, Laura prepared for a final confrontation. She armed herself with a kitchen knife, a flashlight, and set up cameras. If she couldn't stop the entity, she would at least document it. The next voicemail came at midnight. "It ends tonight." The static returned, louder and more oppressive than ever. The shadow figure reappeared, standing in the center of the room. But this time, Laura didn't run. She stood her ground, the knife shaking in her hand. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. The figure shifted, its form becoming more defined. It now resembled a woman. Its face was a grotesque blend of static and human features. Laura's heart stopped as she recognized it. It was her mother. "Mom," she whispered. The entity nodded, its distorted voice blending with the static. "You left me." Tears streamed down Laura's face as memories of her childhood flooded back. She remembered her mother's anger, her isolation, and the day she vanished. "I was just a kid," Laura sobbed. "I didn't know how to help you." The entity's form flickered, its anger replaced by sorrow. "You abandoned me in life, and in death." Laura dropped the knife and stepped closer. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, the static softened, and the figure seemed to dissolve into a faint glow. The oppressive weight lifted from the room, and the entity faded, leaving only the sound of quiet static. Her phone buzzed one last time. The final voicemail played. "Goodbye, Laura." The voicemail stopped, and the shadows no longer haunted her. But the experience had left its mark. Laura's nights were restless, filled with dreams of static and shadows. She moved to a new apartment, hoping to leave the past behind. Yet, even in her new home, subtle signs of the entity's presence lingered. The television occasionally flickered with static. Her phone would buzz with missed calls from unknown numbers. No messages were left. One night, as she sat in her living room, her phone buzzed again. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The call was from an unlisted number. She hesitated, then answered. Silence. And then, faintly, the sound of static. Laura hung up, her hands shaking. She knew she would never truly escape. The connection between her and the entity was permanent. As she sat in the dim light, the static seemed to whisper. And for the first time, she whispered back.